In this video, I'm going to show you how to draw these beautiful leaves with ink pens. So grab your drawing paper, pencil and eraser, your favorite drink, and let's get started. First, we're going to start with a simple leaf. Start by shaping the leaf with your pencil, and I'm going to show you a technique that applies to any leaf you want to draw. And yes, you could totally start with your ink pen right now and skip the pencil, but I guess I was feeling a little bit insecure today. Don't judge me. So this is why I'm starting with the pencil first. And there's nothing wrong with that, okay? Now when you're done, you can outline everything with a pen. First disclaimer, attention. The most important thing to make your leaf look more realistic is to leave a white line in the middle, right next to the black line right here. This is that line that divides the leaf into sections, and it's usually lighter than the rest, so we're just gonna leave it white. When you start lightly hatching on the direction of the leaf veins to add a little bit of a darker tone to your leaf, keep that in mind so you don't go over the invisible white line. Just hatch lightly like this on both sides of the leaf, and then do some darker, shorter lines moving from the outside in like this, just on the edges, and always following the same diagonal direction at first. And then you can do some more lines moving from the inside out like this. As you can see, we are trying to leave the area in between these lines a little bit lighter, and this is going to create that curved effect on your leaf. You're also not going to go over the whole leaf doing this, just intercalate the groups of lines. You can do this kind of randomly, and this is going to help you make the result look a little bit more natural. Remember that with ink, less is more, so just position the darker lines on a few areas on the edge of your leaf and on the edge of the middle line, and then you just see if you need more. The less lines you add, the lighter your result is going to be. So let's say if your leaf is light green and not dark green, you would want to hatch last to get a lighter result. You can also choose a side to be your shadow side. So here I chose the right side to be the shadow side, and I made the right side on both sections of the leaf a little bit darker. If you accidentally covered your white line in the middle, just use a white gel pen to correct that, and you should be good to go. And to finish it up, you can draw some small groups of lines in the direction along the leaf where you have your shadow spots, just to add some personality to your leaf, but this is totally not necessary. It kind of looked good already before. So let's move on to the next one. And this is going to be a little bit more challenging. We're going to do a maple leaf, and it's a little bit harder because they have like 3 main veins instead of just one. So I want to show you how you can do the same thing we did on the first leaf in a situation like that. So after you drew the first sketch, you can outline it with the ink pen and start with the same thing we did for the first leaf, doing some short hatching on the outside edges of the leaf and also coming from the main veins towards the outside edges. At some point though, you're gonna face a little conflict because the lines moving diagonally from the side veins towards the middle vein will end up clashing, and you don't want that to happen because it's gonna look weird. So unless you want to keep your leaf pretty simple and light, avoiding these lines to even get close to each other, you can experiment with some cross hatching, which is basically doing the same thing we were doing, drawing these groups of lines like this but in different directions as well, and layer them on top of each other. Basically, wherever you have more ink, you're gonna get a darker result. So wherever you want your leaf to be a little bit darker, you can hatch another layer of lines in a different direction on top of the lines you already have on paper. And I really like doing this in groups of lines like this because it's easier to control how dark or light your leaf will be in the end, and it just creates a little bit of an interesting texture to it. Just try to make the spots around the edges and also close to the veins darker, so you create this curved feeling for your leaf. And always remember to leave the veins white with the white line that we talked about before. Another trick that really helps is to make some specific spots a little bit darker than the rest. I like making the tips, like wherever we have these pointed tips at the top, darker so they look like they're slightly curved, and the edges with inside curves, I don't know how to call that. It's like where the curves are moving in instead of out. Does that make sense? You see what I'm doing here, right? It's not like the whole outside edge is darker. It's mostly those specific spots. Same goes for the spots closer to the veins. It's not all darker, just enough to create the aspect of a curve. And this is basically it. You can stop before me if you want the final result to look a little bit lighter, or keep going and add more layers of lines to make it look even darker if that's what you're going for. Now I'm just gonna show you 3 more leaves, but the system is basically the same. I'm gonna do one here that has all these beautiful rounded curves and more veins like this, and I'm literally gonna repeat the process of the leaf we just did, but using the curves to guide the lines lines for me this time. So after you sketch an outline, you can start hatching in the direction of their smaller veins coming diagonally from the main veins like this. And where the lines might clash, we are just going to change the directions a little bit to follow these curves and cover the whole leaf. You should end up with something like this. So we already have a base layer, and now you can just intensify the lines where you want them to be darker in the same direction they are already in. So again, same spots as before, we want to shade the outside edges and the areas closer to the veins. One tip I have for you though, in this case, we have all these different sections of the leaf, right? So it's like little arms coming out. Try to make the tones not too even on all of these sections. So you can get like 2 or 3 sections and make them a little bit darker than the rest, because this will help you look a little bit more natural. If you look in nature, a leaf is never completely flat or like, you know, the whole thing looking all the same unless it's really small. So we expect that the light is going to look a little bit different in a slightly curved surface like a leaf. And this is why I'm making these areas a little bit darker over here. And this honestly already looks good to me, so you can totally stop here. I ended up thinking that the lines are a little bit too strong, like the line pattern is a little bit too intense. It kind of looks like hair to me. I wanted to make the texture look a little bit more like a leaf, like a little bit more flat. So I'm finishing with a light cross hatching on top just to break the lines a little bit. But of course, this is making everything a little bit darker. So I don't know if it's not what you're going for, you can just skip this step. And this is basically it for this leaf. Remember, you can always add some extra light spots and correct a few mistakes here and there with the white gel pen or white ink in the end if you want. Next, I wanted to show you a 2-color leaf on a more traditional shape. And to create 2 colors with black and white, we obviously don't have 2 colors, so we have to create 2 tones of gray, one lighter and one darker. So start with your basic leaf shape and sketch the pattern separating the 2 colors like this. And then with the pen, you're going to outline and do something different for the texture this time. So instead of doing the lines in the direction of the veins, we're going to create a little wall of parallel short lines on each section in between the veins like this. So the lines are going to go up instead of sideways like we were doing before. And they're gonna slightly curve following the movement of this section. It's so weird to describe this, but you clearly see what I'm doing, right? Honestly, this is a much more stylized way of drawing a leaf. I really like this, and this is actually a super cool leaf in my opinion. But just for the sake of this tutorial, we're going to try to make this a little bit more realistic. So after we're done with this, I'm going to reapply the pencil on the pattern here just so you guys can see a little bit better. And now on the inside section, I'm going to hatch on the opposite direction to create another layer of ink and make this area inside the pattern darker than the rest. And now on a different direction, another layer of lines covering more of this pattern over here. And to make the curved effect, we always have to work on the shadows closer to the main vein and also on the outsides a little bit. For this leaf, I'm trying to create one of those more like a rubber plant, like a thicker type of leaf. So the outsides are not going to be too curved. So I'm not going to put too much shadows on the edges, like on the outsides of the leaf. I'm just going to focus more on the inside part. So right where the main vein of the leaf is, dividing the leaf in 2. I'm just going to make those areas a little bit darker with more lines coming from the vein, diagonally like this. We can do some lines across, like along the vein as well. And just keep covering this area until we can't see the first lines too much. Whenever you want to make an area darker, just create another group of lines in a different direction from what you have on paper so far, so you can create a texture that looks more like a leaf. And this is our quote-unquote 2-color leaf. Now let's move on to our last single leaf of today. This is such a beautiful one. We're going to draw a Monstera leaf, and for this one I recommend you use a reference photo or just pause to copy my sketch, because this is really hard to describe what I'm doing. Actually, for all of these drawings, using reference pictures is the best way to go. But for this one, basically, you start with a circle. You're going to have a vertical line in the middle. You're going to shape the circle into something closer to like heart shape. And then you're going to draw these sections coming from the middle line like this. Also, you can add some little holes randomly, and this looks super cute. Adds a little bit of personality to your leaf. And now we can outline. And for this one, instead of just leaving the veins white like we did before, I really want these veins to be in a little bit more contrast. So I'm going to just outline each vein and still keeping them white. So you see what I'm doing here, right? I'm outlining the vein. And this is actually going to help us to not go over them with our hatching. And for this one, we're just gonna jump straight to the cross hatching technique. So I'm just gonna hatch in a vertical direction everywhere. I'm not following any curves, any directions. I'm just going straight vertical everywhere just to add the base tone for this leaf. And this is where a reference photo comes to be useful, because since this leaf is so complex with a bunch of little sections, the light will reflect really uniquely on each part of the leaf. So just get a Monstera leaf picture online just so you can follow the shadow scheme and add more lines. And to create the shadow effect, you can just add more lines. So you're gonna add another layer of ink where you want it to be darker. I'm doing the same direction for the first layer of ink. And as you draw and start building confidence in what you're doing, you'll be able to go ahead and add some really dark spots in small areas where you have really dark shadows. And this starts creating that beautiful contrast and make your leaf look more realistic. Once you have the base layers, you can add more sections of lines in other directions. So basically crossing the lines we already have with groups of lines. And this part is really fun because you really start seeing more layers and more groups of lines, because you really start creating more contrast and more of a 3D effect. So your leaf is going to look more realistic and just looking super nice like this. I think this one was my favorite so far. And these leaves look super beautiful, but you might be wondering how to draw a group of leaves instead of only one, right? Because on a group of leaves, they're all gonna look different. So now I'm gonna show you how I usually do it. I 100% am using a reference picture for this, and I recommend you do too, because especially with leaves and foliage, if you want to create a more realistic representation of nature as it is, it's pretty illogical sometimes, and it's really hard to come up with the shapes and the shadows just from imagination, especially when it comes to the shading part, to be honest. So that being said, as you can see from the sketch, all the leaves are different and in unique positions. No leaf is the same as another one, and some of them are facing us, the viewer, some of them are far in the back, some of them are closer together, some of them are bigger or smaller. They are in a much different shape. Sometimes we can only see the tip of the leaf, sometimes they're curved or slightly folded so we can see the top and the bottom of the leaf, which I usually think it's really cool. It looks really beautiful in drawings. So just make sure you have a nice group of uneven leaves in different positions, and then you can hatch on each side of each leaf like this, kind of the way we did on the first leaf we drew today. And after you covered all of them, you can add another layer of lines on the same direction as before on the darker spots like this. And again, guys, I would not be able to figure the shadows out perfectly just from imagination. Like, I'm nowhere near having that visual memory, and I draw leaves all the time, but still, if they are in weird positions like this, it's really hard to just figure out where the shadows are gonna be. So I'm just looking at the picture, identifying the darker areas, and then replicating the shadows with more groups of lines like this. If you are drawing from reference, my best tip for you is to try to separate the tones with geometrical shapes. So you observe your picture and try to look at the area of a shadow and try to see that as a geometrical shape and then apply that to your drawing. It's much easier to draw from reference when you're doing this. If you're interested, I can do another video just on how to draw from reference, because honestly, this is how I learned to draw. When I understood the techniques of drawing from reference and how to actually observe an object to draw it, like, it's completely different than to just look at something and just draw it. Like, there is a technique behind it. There's methods and great tips that I could give you guys on how to actually portray an object you're looking at on a drawing. So if you're interested in that, let me know in the comments and I can do a video on that for you. Now back to our leaf. I really love drawing the dark contrast, so I really like this darker style of drawing, and I really like the solid blacks to create more intense shadows. If you really want a lighter result, you can just leave more white space, add less lines, use a thinner line or like an older pen to get lighter lines. And to do the stem, you can just hatch on the length of the stem. You can make one side darker and the middle part lighter like this. And if you have a white gel pen or this amazing white ink that I swear by now, by the way, I have all of these materials listed in the description if you're interested, you can add some extra light spots in the end or even correct some little mistakes, even though we all know there are no mistakes, obviously, but you know what I'm talking about. And this is how you draw leaves. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Also, if you want some full longer classes, I have a link to all my Skillshare classes in the description. I also recently released my book, which you can get on Amazon or anywhere you buy books, and I hope all of these resources help you in your drawing journey. Thank you so much for watching my video, and I'll see you next time. Bye! Are you super excited?
Yeah. 2 books!
Books! How many books are there?
Don't get my blood on them.
Oh my god. Oh, your finger. Don't need to break this old phone. Oh my god, this is so exciting!